Gentlemen, this is a secure federal facility. Do you have your Montana Real IDs?
ID? I'm Captain Lewis, and this is Captain Clark.
I'm sorry, I can't let you in.
Can't go into federal facilities. Can't fly. Maybe we should just stay on the river.
We'll float home. Let me check the Google. What's a dam?
Discover more at mtrealid.gov. Available now.
Montana Real ID. It's the real me.
Brought to you by the Montana Department of Justice.
Join the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula and your community to save the oldest known Willamette steam engine in the nation. Why is Missoula's engine number 7 unique? The engine spent its life in our mountains and valleys, never traveling more than 80 miles from Missoula. It is one of only 2 surviving locomotives from Anaconda Lumber Co. and the only one in Montana. It's a Hollywood movie star, as it played a leading role in the 1954 film Timberjack. Support history and save the train. Learn more and donate at fortmissoulamuseum.org.
ESPN Radio for Western Montana, KKVU HD3 Stevensville, and 102.9 FM on K275BS Missoula. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to Tutel and Nuanez, Montana's only statewide sports talk show. Broadcast on 102.9 ESPN Radio for Western Montana and across the state on SWX Television.
I like football!
Now, sports talk from Montana for Montana. Live from the Kurtz Polaris studio, here is Ryan Tutel and Coulter Nuanez.
Hello, Montana. Montana, strong win against Portland State last night. LSU, a strong win against Clemson last night. It is Tutel and Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio, SWX Montana Television. Hi, how are you? Outstanding to be with you on this Tuesday afternoon. Hope you are having a fantastic day. Thanks for letting us spend some of it with you on your radios, on your televisions, on your internets, and so on. We appreciate being with you. We really do. If you'd like to find us on the World Wide Web, 102.9 ESPN is where you go, 1029ESPN.com. You go there, you listen live on the Listen Live tab. It is available all the time. It is called a stream, and it is there thanks to Opportunity Bank. Opportunity Bank, your local bank, your opportunity. If you'd like to pick up your phone and call 329-1899, 329-1899, the phone number. All guests join us via the Rankish Brothers RV phone line. Today in the show, we talk some men Grizz basketball. The Grizzlies a very strong victory yesterday over Portland State. It was a 4-point game in the middle stages of the second half, and then the Grizz really put the clamps down, executed offensively, executed defensively, really for the for what is effectively the fourth quarter of that basketball game, and it ended up winning going away in the basketball game last night. So a strong win for the Grizzlies, back-to-back strong wins for Montana, who is now 5-1 and atop the Big Sky Conference. We also are going to get into a couple of different things. Danny Sprinkle going to join us on the show today. Coach Sprinkle, the head coach of the Montana State men's team, they were off last night. They have a full week between games. They played Portland State on Saturday. They will play Eastern Washington this forthcoming Saturday. So we caught Coach here this afternoon, and we'll talk to him just about where he's at. His first year as the head coach of the Montana State Bobcats, and his team now 3-3 in Big Sky Conference play, and has had they've had one strong win and one double-digit loss, and then everything else has been nail-biting for Montana State. A 1-point loss Saturday. They had a 2-point win going back. So they've been in some very good close games, and they are sort of the epitome of what is the openness of the Big Sky Conference right now, the Montana State Bobcats. So we'll talk about that. Yes, we will get into the Tigers National Championship. Who knew it was going to be a Tigers National Championship before the game? Well, I did. Just didn't know if it would be the LSU or the Clemson brand. But it is LSU who, stamped it, right? I mean, they just proved themselves as the best team in the country, pretty clearly last night in a strong victory. A multiple score was a 45-28 win over Clemson last night, and the first loss in 2 seasons for the Clemson Tigers. I mean, they were 29-0 heading into that football game, 45. The first loss ever for Trevor Lawrence. So a fantastic win last night for Ed Ogeron and for the rest of the team. 42-25, on the final score of that game last night. In the next hour, Mike Dugar from The Athletic will join us once again. Our buddy Mike Dugar covers the Seahawks for The Athletic, and we'll get kind of his final thoughts and his wrap up on the year that was the Seattle Seahawks as their season came to a close over the weekend at the hands of the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau, and sort of his assessment of what the team was and also where they're at heading into this offseason and next year, in Seattle. So we'll get into that as well. We'll also talk a little bit about some high school stuff. We got some high school hoops for you and things set up. So there you go. That is our show outlook. Hi, Coulter. Nice pink shirt, man. Digging it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. The Grizzlies and the Portland State Vikings, Coulter. We were at this game last night, and it was a back-and-forth affair, a game that, saw Portland State with a couple starters out of this game really fight and put Montana in some bad spots, especially in the second half. They were down by just 4 points and had already gotten Montana into the bonus in terms of fouls. And so they were in really good shape, and Montana just slams the door shut. Saeed Pridgett is 2 rebounds away from a triple-double in this game. He's been playing on ball that has revolutionized some of what they've been doing offensively. And Kendall Manuel, 27 last night. Absolutely spectacular. He has caught fire from the floor. I mean, it was a little bit of a question mark of what's going on with Kendall Manuel, this great shooter. And we've seen him be a great shooter, but wasn't in the first, kind of in the non-conference portion of the season. But this last couple of weeks has been absolutely outstanding. But really everybody, I mean, Mac Anderson was absolutely spectacular last night. Timmy Falls came in and was massive as a contributor and distributor of the basketball, as he often is. And Derek Carter-Hollinger, another big night. In fact, Derek Carter-Hollinger, the freshman of the Montana Grizzlies, is the Big Sky Conference Men's Basketball Player of the Week. So 3 consecutive Players of the Week from the Montana Grizzlies. And this time, DCH, the freshman, getting the award. So everybody was contributing last night. And Coulter, last night we're sitting there watching the game. This was a different-looking Montana team from what we'd seen in person up to this point. They've looked great. They looked obviously great at Eastern Washington. And even in the loss in Northern Colorado, you could start to see some things sort of turning for Montana, but they've turned a serious corner. It's not always a linear improvement, right? It's it spikes and then maybe it plateaus a little bit and then maybe it spikes, and they're in a moment right now of tremendous growth as a team.
They went from being brutal to watch to beautiful to watch, and I think that's happened in less than a month. And I think that there's several reasons for it. I think that Montana, for as much talent as the Grizz have had the last 2 years, particularly last year, they didn't have the hierarchy in terms of role definition that they needed to. And I think that even though that team was spectacular to watch at times, they also left something to be desired at times. And oftentimes it just looked clunky. It looked brutal. But this team went from having no continuity, having no flow, and seeming to just be clunky in every stage of the game, communication-wise, flow-wise, offensive sets, defensive sets, everything, to all of those things flowing wonderfully. And that's only been for 2 games. So how do you sustain it? And I do think these 2 games have the distinct similarity in the fact that even though there's a lot of new faces on this Grizz team, a lot of guys that are playing elevated roles, there's still a lot of guys that have been on the team, and they remember that Eastern Washington swept them, that they lost in Cheney the last 2 years, and that Portland State swept them a year ago, and that the Portland State and Eastern Washington are the 2 teams besides Northern Colorado that have been able to touch the Grizz in the last 3 years. Everybody else has gone by the wayside. Those are the only teams that have beat them. And then the Montana State had the one where Tyler Hall went off for 37 in Bozeman a couple years back. But besides that,
Sacramento State has had a couple.
They've had a couple
in Sac State.
In Sac State, right. But, I mean, these 2 teams are the most recent teams that have I mean, the most recent conference loss for the Grizz, with the exception of their one conference loss this year. Their last conference loss of a year ago was against Portland State in Portland. So I think these guys remember that. But also I think that they've made a couple tweaks schematically that have really opened things up. Instead of putting Saeed Pridgett on the block and running their standard offense that they've run for ever and ever and ever, dump it down, the point guard runs the wheel, pops out on the other side, get the ball to both sides. Instead, now they put Saeed Pridgett on the ball at times. They've been running a lot more high ball screen stuff. That simplifies things for Mac Anderson. That simplifies things for Derek Carter-Hollinger. It simplifies things if Timmy Falls is playing on the ball. he can have some room to drive now. So their spacing's a lot better, their ball movement's a lot better, their chemistry's a lot better. And I think that even though we are only about a third through the Big Sky Conference season so far, Travis DeCuire deserves a tremendous amount of credit already because he has molded these guys. And I mean, I would venture to say
he was getting fired.
They don't have a Michael Ogine. Like that's just this wow factor type player, but I just think from a pure basketball standpoint, they're more appealing to watch. Just this small sample size, just the last two games, but they're more appealing to watch than a lot of what I saw a year ago, and I think that in itself is a testament to just the job that the coaching staff's done, and also just the buy-in from the players.
Yeah, it's been a lot more fluid, a lot more ball movement, as you said. We asked Coach DeCuire last night, sort of that very thing, Coulter. You said, why has it been? You've been playing so much better the last couple of weeks. Pay attention, people, because as usual, post-game, Travis DeCuire, a little hoarse, a little hard to hear. But here you go, his answer to the question of what has changed the last couple of weeks for this Grizz men's basketball team.
Attention to detail. I think, we're doing a better job of understanding the scout. The guys are spending more time reading the scouts and understanding personnel. So I think we're doing a good job there. And then offensively, we're taking care of the ball. We're moving the ball. I think our shot selection is a lot better right now, so our assist-to-turnover ratio has gotten better.
That's quite a number of things that he covered, and that it's all statistically true, but also, statistics are byproducts, man. They're just a result of the way you play the game, and they can maybe point to something after the fact that was maybe a blind spot, but the reality is all the things that they just sort of work together. It's symbiotic. They build on one another. And in particular, Mac Anderson last night was very, very good. He came in. He did not start in this basketball game and really hasn't been starting, but he did play 21 minutes. He started the second half of this game. Coach DeCuire talked about he went to a defensive lineup, which is why he played a lot more. And
which was also a big lineup, too. I thought it was very interesting because they took Timmy Falls off the ball so that Timmy Falls could guard Holland Woods and not expend too much energy. But then they put Syed Pridgett on the ball. They flank him with Timmy Falls, Kendall Manuel. So that's a pretty normal-sized backcourt. But then when you splice it in with Derek Carter-Hollinger and Mac Anderson, it all of a sudden becomes one of their bigger lineups because now Pridgett doesn't have to guard the post anymore. You can have one of those two younger guys guard the post. And that was where the game turned. I mean, this was 58-56 at the under-12 media timeout. And then Montana went on to an 11-2 run, and I think they ended up scoring 27 out of the next 35 or 37 points. I can't remember the exact count. But they really took control of the game and dominated the game, and it was Mac Anderson. I mean, Mac Anderson scored 4 straight buckets, and I think it was a product of two things. Saul Nuhu, the Portland State standout senior center, he did not play in this game.
Yeah, it's a big loss for Portland State when he's not there.
And they need him to be the guy who guards the inbounder because they run this full-court trap, and they also need him to be the guy to protect the rim. And so Montana was getting a lot of easy buckets in the lane, but also it was just a product of their patience as well. Travis DeCuire talked about it after the Eastern Washington game. They had to be patient to let their actions in their offense work. And when they do that, they find open layups, and that's how you get 21 and 20 assists, respectively, in consecutive games.
So Mac Anderson, 10 points last night on, are you ready? 5 of 5 from the field. Lots of on and down the rim types of plays for Mac Anderson, but that's not why he was there. He was just there for his defense. But why was he playing better? Here's what Travis DeCuire had to say.
I think that Mac's been playing with a lot more confidence lately. I think the play out of Jared Samuelson is taking a lot of pressure off of Mac and made his role a lot more defined for him. I feel like that he's more focused on defending and rebounding and not so concerned about his offense, and all of a sudden he's making shots.
So there you go, and that's kind of the way it goes when he was relied on because out of necessity last year. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. With Jamarico out, he became the guy, and he wasn't ready to be in that role and wasn't brought in to be in that role, but was needed, and so he came in, and that's beneficial to him and from an experience standpoint and all that. But now when you get a transfer, like Jared Samuelson to come in, who his best trait is his scoring ability. I mean, he's great around the rim, on the block, in the post with the ball in his hands, and that's not Mac's strength. Mac's strength is in transition and defending the rim.
Right.
And so now when he can focus, as Coach DeCuire said, the things that he needs to be in and be put in specifically to do that stuff. And you made a great point today. he got in a tremendous amount of foul trouble last year because he could not get to the spot in time and was maybe just a little step behind mentally on some of the defensive rotations and stuff. You know what? You pick up a foul or two now, it's okay. You don't have to play 30 minutes a game. We need you for 15 or whatever it might be. But then that 15 is it's just such a much more rich contribution that he seems to be able to give in this setting right now with that defined role.
I mean, to me, the best coaches are the guys, instead of picking apart what their guys don't do well, they find the things their guys do well and put them in a position to do it.
Yeah.
And what you just said about the fouls, that's exactly what it is. Mac Anderson is going to go after some shots. He's not a refined shot blocker yet, but he has the potential to be because he's 6'9". He's got great length and he can jump.
Great leaper.
And he just needs to figure out his timing, when to go for blocks, but he's going to get fouls. I mean, if he plays 20 minutes a game, there's a chance he's going to be flirting with fouling out. But that's okay when you have Jared Samuelson or when you have Saeed Pridgett who can move up to the front court if he's not playing in the back court. We look at that 5-of-5 stat line for Mac Anderson, too. That's what he needs. Just catch the lob. Catch the dump down. Just dunk it. He didn't dribble the ball one time last night. I mean, I'm pretty sure Saeed Pridgett had 4 out of his 10 assists on this little dump-offs to Mac Anderson. But I think that's the defining thing with this Grizz team right now is so many of the guys last year muddled each other's roles. Bobby Moorhead was the only guy that really had a defined role. Here's what you do. Here's what we need from you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this year, with Kendall Manuel making shots, it spreads everything out for everybody. But we talked to Timmy Falls after the game, and I said, Timmy, I put this on Twitter, but I think that this is a compliment to you. I said, I think that where you've turned the corner the most is just realizing that if you make shots or not, that's way down the list of what Montana needs you to do. What the Grizz need from Timmy Falls: energy, dictate the tempo of the game on both sides, be the pesky defender that you are, bring the electricity, bring the sweet passing, be the energy guy, and then it's okay if you go 0-4 from 3 because you still have the confidence in yourself and from your teammates to go up and step up and hit the dagger like he did last night. But the scoring line is inconsequential. He was 3 of 9 last night, but I thought he was one of the most important players in the game because he guarded Holland Woods and he was able to dictate the pace on both sides.
He was. Holland Woods, by the way, did lead Portland State with 18 points, but only went 5 of 13 from the floor. He scored 8 of his 18 from the free throw line. It was 8 of 9 from the stripe. So when you talk about his actual shooting percentage, he was held to a very low percentage, and especially with a couple of starters out, if you hold Holland Woods to under 20 points, you're in a great shape. Here's the other thing defensively as a team they did. They held Portland State to 0 of 11 from beyond the arc. Not one made three-pointer for Portland State. In this day and age, you're not winning games if you can't make a couple threes at least. And they didn't let them get many off. And this is not a heavy three-point shooting team as it is, but nonetheless, 0 of 11. I mean, there's a lot of points that are missing then at that point in what becomes an 85-70 final in this thing. You mentioned Timmy Falls. You asked him about beating Portland State because, as you mentioned, Portland State swept the Grizzlies last year. What was it like for him to return and get this one?
It felt good to get a win. We know we struggled with them in the past, so we just made sure we focused on the scout, took away what they wanted, and just played our best, honestly.
Tutel Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio. You also asked Timmy Falls what is sort of the question of the night, but a very reasonable one. What's happened? What's changed in the last couple of weeks that's made this team look so much better and, frankly, been so much better than what they were prior to it?
I think we're just getting a little bit more mature. We're playing more as a team. I think our pace on both defense and offense got way better than the preseason. So as long as we run our offense really well and then lock up on D, we just keep improving on it. So we're going to get even better from now.
It's interesting, though. You look at the guys who really played well last night, and basically everybody played well that played for Montana last night. And you point out, the efficacy of Timmy Falls or the definitive role and what he was able to do with Mac Anderson and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, the 2 stalwart seniors were the dudes. I mean, You talk about Saeed Pridgett having two rebounds away from, was it the 4th triple-double?
Yeah, Kareem Jamar had 2, and Delvon Anderson had 1. That's it. 4th triple-double in program history. It would have been.
That's amazing.
And I think he was 2 rebounds and 2 assists shy at Eastern Washington as well.
No, look, I mean, I understand that triple-doubles in the college game are far less frequent than they are in the NBA, and it's less time, and it's a whole different ball game and all that kind of stuff. But to think that there's only been 3 triple-doubles in the history of the University of Montana is remarkable. And to think that Saeed Pridgett was 2 rebounds away. Not he got 10 assists for crying out. It's usually the dimes that do you in there. 17 points, 10 assists, 8 rebounds. Absolutely phenomenal. Both directions for Saeed Pridgett. And sometimes I feel like, the guys who are the guys that are still the drivers of the engine for sure kind of get taken for granted because you expect it from a guy like him. But another phenomenal night. And then Kendall Manuel has just been lights out. I mean, 27 points last night, 5 of 7 from beyond the arc. I mean, he cannot miss right now.
I mean, it's actually unbelievable considering the way he was shooting earlier in the year. I mean, I think he came into conference play below 35%, and he was shooting below 30%, I think, from 3. He's shooting 62% over his last 4 games in league play through 6 league games. Kendall Manuel, a 3-point specialist, he has diversified his game a great deal.
Yes, he has.
But I mean, the guy's a shooter.
Yep.
He's 4th in the league in field goal percentage in league play. He's shooting 55% from the field. He's a jump shooter.
Even though half of his attempts are from beyond the arc, if not more.
Right now, he's 23 of 26 from the free throw line in league play. He's shooting 88.8% from the free throw line in league, and he's shooting 87% from the free throw line overall. He would be in the 90s. I jinxed him last night. I looked up his free throw percentage and said something to somebody sitting next to me, and then he missed the first out of 3 on a fouled 3-pointer.
That is your fault.
He'd probably be in the 90s. But the guy's also then making almost 3 3-pointers a game, and he's shooting over 50% from deep as well. He's shooting 55% from beyond the 3-point line in league play. And obviously, it's a slightly small sample size, but the guy right now, he's tied for 2nd in the league in scoring in league games. I mean, honestly, if you were to say that the league season ends right now, just 6 games in, with those shooting splits,
he's in the conversation.
Kendall Manuel is the MVP of the Big Sky Conference because the other guys that have comparable stats, Holland Woods, I mean, his team's won 2 league games. Trayvon Allen from Idaho, his team hasn't been in the same. I mean, I'm just saying it's early.
Yeah.
It's like, but I guess what you'd say is he's been the player of the month in the Big Sky Conference, and it's a great story considering he's a Montana kid that has international roots that then went to the Pac-12 and played. I mean, he got a lot of playing time at Oregon State, and then comes back. And on one hand, it was good that he got cleared last year because he was a key member of the NCAA tournament team for the Grizzlies. He was the newcomer of the year in the league. But on the other hand, if he would have sat out last year, he could have had 2 years left. So the fact that he somewhat made a sacrifice to burn last year and be the 7th man, even though he was an impact guy, it's all paying off now for him, having a great senior year so far, especially in league play.
We talked to Kendall Manuel after the game last night as well and asked more specifically the last game or two. The ball movement of Montana has been just so much better in general. And why has that been, and what has that meant for him as a shooter?
Just being able to get everybody to commit to driving in the lane and kicking it, because before we were having people just drive, but we weren't necessarily getting in the lane or anything. It was just more of like, oh, I'm going to dribble and then pass it, and it was all stagnant. But now, like I said, I think we're all getting more comfortable together and everything, and the ball's moving well. Everybody's making plays and doing what they're supposed to do. Timmy does a great job of slashing and finding people, and that's been a big thing that's helped us, because obviously people are going to key off of me and Saeed too.
So there you go. I mean, that's the driving and dishing, but driving with a purpose, driving to the lane, forcing defenders to collapse. I mean, there's a difference between taking a jog with the ball through the, from wing to wing, and then driving with a purpose and a destination in mind to force the defense to commit and then kicking it out. And when you can do that, then that ball starts whipping around, and all of a sudden, guess what? Dudes are open that the defenders don't want open, and that has been more often than not Kendall Manuel, who's been spectacular. The other guy we got to talk about here, though, Coulter, is DCH, Derek Carter-Hollinger. 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. This, paired with his game against Eastern Washington, which was his breakout game of the year.
20 and 14, 4 blocks.
Made him the Big Sky Conference Men's Basketball Player of the Week. How about this? He's averaging 9 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 assists, and 16.5 points on the week. And he's doing it on, are you ready? 15 of 19 shooting. You're talking about what is 79% from the floor in these 2 games. Now, it's funky where the player of the week, I mean, it's 2 games. If you play 2 good games back-to-back, you can be the player of the week, and that's what he's done. But first of all, so far, it's Montana and nobody else.
It's in league play,
You Saeed Pridgett and then Kendall Manuel and now Derek Carter-Hollinger have been the Big Sky Conference Players of the Week for the 3 awards that have been handed out in conference play. But also, the emergence of this kid, we talked about after the Eastern game that is that the spark for a freshman to, when he finally has that big night to really get the confidence going. Look, I mean, you don't know until you know. When you get into Division I, you take a step up from whatever. I don't care what high school ball you were playing. It's a different deal. Division I college basketball, regardless of the conference that you're in, to prove to yourself that you can do it and just go, okay, I'm here. And it's not, it's not to say that you're going to expect necessarily, 17 points a game out of Derek Carter-Hollinger for the rest of the season or anything like that. But you can just see. I mean, the whole team has been playing better, but certainly he has been a benefactor of that, and his game has reached a new height from a confidence standpoint.
They are playing a pretty short bench right now, but they're putting everybody in a position to do what they do well. And Derek Carter-Hollinger can by no means do everything. He can actually only do a few things at an elite level, but he can do a few things at an elite level as a true freshman. He's an elite leaper. He's a great rebounder. He's got natural shot blocking instincts, and anytime that he steps back and hits a couple 3-pointers in a game, it's going to make Montana almost impossible to beat. I mean, if he's scoring in double figures and giving you a couple pick and pop 3-pointers, that just changes everything that they do on offense. If him and Samuelson both can make the step back 3 out of the ball screen pick and roll, it makes Montana really hard to defend. But I just think that they're doing such a great job of putting everybody in a position to succeed. And it's great to watch. I hope that they can maintain it because it really is special. But I do think two factors I think is worth noting. One, I think that this team is a young team that is starting to reap the dividends of the really difficult non-conference that they played. It's not, Portland State's not Oregon. So you have a ton of confidence going into the game. They're not Arkansas. They're not a Power 5 Washington school. And none of the schools in the Big Sky are. I think you can see a confidence boost because of that. And I also think that it's going to be a big turning point now because they're not on break anymore. I think that they made huge strides during Christmas break because you could have more intense practices. The guys could be more focused. I asked Coach DeKeer that after the game, after we were done with the interviews. I said, it's got to be a factor that these guys haven't been in school. And he said, oh, no question. And he said, now we got to lock back in because last night was the first night after the first day of school. The first day of school is always the best day of school.
Right.
And now you got to continue to focus and continue to get better because practices will be more fleeting as they go down the stretch.
A couple of just final notes on this because I think this is interesting. Derek Carter-Hollinger, the first freshman to win Conference Player of the Week since, are you ready? Holland Woods did it in 2017, and he is the first Montana Grizzly to do it since they've kept the records of it in Big Sky, of conference records of the Player of the Week. No freshman for the Grizzlies ever to do it. And it's also the first time since 2012-2013 that the same team in consecutive weeks has had 3 different guys do it. Sometimes you have one guy who's just so good, and just does it, but to have 3 different guys do it really shows the diversity of this team and the way they're doing it. So a good week. The Grizzlies 5-1 in the Big Sky Conference. They are a game ahead of Northern Colorado and Southern Utah, who are both 3-1. How they've played 2 more games in those 2 teams shows you, again, the imbalance of some of the scheduling, and Montana will enjoy some time off while those teams are playing as you go through the rest of the schedule. Sacramento State, Idaho State at 3-2, and the Montana State Bobcats at 3-3. Speaking of, Danny Sprinkle, the head coach of the Montana State Bobcats, is going to join us right after this.
Experience matters. Walk into any Farmer State Bank to learn just how much. You'll find an experienced staff of professionals ready and willing to go the extra mile to help you succeed. Bank on the go with mobile and internet banking solutions, or enjoy our legendary personal service face-to-face in the lobby. Visit farmersebank.com or a location near you to learn more. Farmer State Bank, your Montana bank since 1907, member FDIC.
Hey, it's Coulter, and I'm here with Catherine from The Advocates. If you've been in a car accident or need help dealing with the insurance companies, you should give The Advocates a call. They can tell you if you have a case right over the phone.
That's right. It doesn't cost anything to call, and we'd be happy to talk to you and assess your situation. You don't want to have to deal with contacting the insurance companies and setting up a claim. We can do that for you. We take the hassle out of the process, so you can just focus on getting better.
There you go, folks. If you've been injured in an accident, give The Advocates a call, 406-640-4444, or online at montanaadvocates.com. You deserve The Advocates.
Gentlemen, this is a secure federal facility. Do you have your Montana Real IDs?
ID? I'm Captain Lewis, and this is Captain Clark.
I'm sorry, I can't let you in.
Can't go into federal facilities. Can't fly. Maybe we should just stay on the river.
We'll float home. Let me check the Google. What's a dam?
Discover more at mtrealid.gov. Available now.
Montana Real ID. It's the real me.
Brought to you by the Montana Department of Justice.
Hey guys, it's Ryan and Coulter from Tutel and Nuanez here to tell you about our brand new project that we are so excited to release, Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree, the podcast series with all of the living coaches in the history of the University of Montana men's basketball team.
From the legendary godfather of the coaching tree, Judd Heathcote, a string of some of the most successful coaches in college basketball had their careers start at the University of Montana.
It really is a remarkable group when you sit back and think about it and what all of these guys have accomplished throughout their careers in the game. And Coulter, I'm excited because Wednesday, our first one comes out, Jim Brandenburg.
Brandenburg was only the head coach at Montana for 2 years, but he was certainly the bridge from Judd Heathcote to Mike Montgomery, and that set the stage for the rest of this tremendous coaching tree. We'll be excited each week throughout the winter and spring to roll out Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree podcast.
Just search Grizz Greats wherever you get your podcasts and listen all season long. Grizz Greats, a Coaching Tree podcast, is brought to you by Blackfoot Communications.
Hey there, Coulter Nuanez from your favorite daily sports talk show, Tutel Nuanez. I'm here with Tom from Aspen Sound. Tom, last winter I got a sweet car starter. It's something I think everybody needs.
You know, Coulter, I couldn't agree more, and my wife sure thinks so too. We've got a lot of sweet deals. We actually have it capable now where you can start it from your phone from anywhere you'd like. We have two-way remotes that'll confirm to you the vehicle started all the way down to our basic package starting at just $299 installed. Come on in and check us out.
Feel the music at Aspen Sound.
ESPN Missoula Sports Center.
Good evening, Ryan Tutel, Coulter Nuanez Sports News for you. The college football season culminated in resounding fashion last night as LSU posted a 42-25 victory over reigning national champion Clemson to claim the college football playoff and FBS national title in New Orleans Monday night.
Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow threw for 463 yards and 5 touchdowns, including 3 touchdown passes in the first half, as LSU raced out to a 28-17 lead and never looked back against a Clemson team gunning for its 3rd national title in 4 years. The national crown is LSU's first since 2007, 3rd in the 21st century, and the 4th in school history. The title also marks the first for 4th-year LSU head coach Ed Orgeron. Louisiana State finished the season with a perfect 15-0 record.
The University of Montana men's basketball team continued to roll Monday night, turning a tight contest against Portland State into a blowout thanks to a big defensive-minded lineup that gave the Vikings fits. UM head coach Travis DeCure moved forward side Bridget to point guard, flanked him with power forwards Mac Anderson and Derek Carter-Hollinger, and the Grizz rolled, turning a 58-56 game against Portland State into an 85-70 victory. Grizz senior Kendall Manuel continued his hot streak, scoring 27 points. Bridget added 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 10 assists and 8 rebounds. He flirted with the 4th triple-double in Grizz history for the 2nd night in a row.
This ESPN Missoula Sports Center is brought to you by Aspen Sound.
Welcome back. Tutel Nuanez, 1029 ESPN Radio, SWX Montana Television. Outstanding to be with all of you. If you're looking for us on the social medias, you can find us on the social medias. That's the point, to be found out there. At Gus Tutel, at 1029 ESPN, and at Skyline Sports MT on Twitter. You can also check out Instagram at 1029 ESPN and get all kinds of goodies on the Instagram there if you so choose. If you would like also to pay attention at home tomorrow. We are very happy about this. We are releasing the first episode of Grizz Greats the Coaching Tree. It's a podcast series. Jim Brandenburg going to be the first release of this series starting tomorrow. It is brought to us by Blackfoot Communications. We appreciate them being on board for this, but we're excited about that. And then we'll have players that we'll interview with that played for each of these coaches in subsequent sort of sub-episodes that will be released afterwards. So we start tomorrow, Wednesday, with Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree. So wherever you get your podcast, just search Grizz Greats, and it will come up, and it will be there for you, all right?
We go now to the Rankage Brothers RV phone line. We welcome the head basketball coach of the Montana State men's team, Danny Sprinkle. Coach Sprinkle, thanks so much for being with us. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Always good to join you guys.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Kind of an interesting deal, this Big Sky Conference scheduling the way it goes. You played on Saturday, a great game, one that you fell by 1 point to Portland State. Now you got a week off to prepare for Eastern Washington. I know you've been doing some recruiting and stuff, but just here early on, your first year back in the Big Sky as a head coach, what's the schedule been like for you, and do you like it? Do you find it weird? What's your experience of it?
I'm not sure yet. I'll tell you right now, though, it was brutal playing 6 games in basically 13 and a half days.
Right.
To start league. And not only basically a game every 2.5 days, but, the travel's brutal. Going, first off, playing 2 games and then going down to northern Colorado, and then you got to, drive an hour and a half to Greeley, drive right back, and then fly to Vegas and drive 3.5 hours to Cedar City and play them at 2 o'clock on a Saturday. And then obviously last week, bus 8 hours to Idaho and come right back after the game. And then you got to play another game on Saturday against the up-tempo team like Portland State, which is tough. But I think one thing that people don't really understand, too, for us and the University of Montana is our trip is actually probably the easiest trip for people. Because you fly into Bozeman or Missoula, and then you play a game, and then you just got to bus 2.5 hours. And where we have to, bus 8 hours to Idaho, and then bus right back and play Portland State, or you got to play Sacramento State, fly to Phoenix, drive 2.5 hours. It's tough. And I know a lot of people think, just going to Montana stuff, but it's actually the easiest trip for them.
Especially because they got rid of the travel partners, right? It used to be, at least if you rode the bus to Idaho 8 hours, you could ride the bus for an hour to Cheney and play them before you got to come 8 hours back.
Exactly. And, I guess kind of with the Lone Wolf, I guess we've got 11 teams now. And, they'll either get it up to 12 or down to 10. It's going to kind of be like that. So the only good thing with our travel was, we didn't start school until yesterday, and so we got 3 of the toughest, road trips out of the way without, missing school.
I do want to ask you about that, but one more question about just the Big Sky in general. You spent so much time in the West Coast, both at Northridge and Fullerton. How does the Big Sky compare to the Big West in terms of scheduling challenges? Is there any similarities, or is it different? What's the comparison?
No, it's kind of completely opposite because, the best thing about the Big West Conference was it was basically a bus league. Right. At Fullerton, we would bus a half hour to Long Beach, a half hour to Irvine, 45 minutes to Riverside, an hour to Northridge, hour and a half to Santa Barbara. The only time we ever got on a plane was the 1 hour Southwest flight to Sacramento to play UC Davis, and then a trip to Hawaii. And so, it was, and even in the non-conference, you're going to play USC or UCLA, which is a half-hour bus ride. So, the toll that it takes on your guy's body is completely different than the Big Sky.
You mentioned that the fact that the kids have been on break. I think it's interesting because leading up to the season, you get a ton of time to work with the guys individually and as a team. But then when the season starts, it's kind of hard to get full 2.5 hour practices in or wherever they might be. When you do get a little bit extra time, though, because the guys don't have class, they don't have other things that are kind of weighing on their minds, what changes about practice? Not only the way you guys operate, but also just the fact that probably the guys just have an opportunity to focus a little bit more just on basketball.
Well, they do, and that's the best part about Christmas break. You can kind of implement some new stuff. You have more time. You have more freedom with the guys. You can feed them more, and they don't have the stress of, of going to class and, the daily grind of that. But, It's it's good and bad, because at this time of year too, you're trying to save their legs too. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's like, how hard do we work them? Do we, and with our schedule, playing the 6 games in 14 days, when we had days off, it was kind of weird just doing walkthroughs. And we have some guys banged up, Harold Frey, and, Devin Kirby hasn't played the last, 7 games, I believe. And so, Layden Ricketts has been banged up, all summer and all fall. And so, we've had to kind of, we've had to adjust quite a bit with our practices and trying to get a lot of stuff done through film and walkthroughs.
Danny Sprinkle joining us. He's the head coach of the Montana State men's basketball team. And, Coach, you get into, you get through the non-conference, and then it's all about conference play in the Big Sky. You're 3-3 to this point. You've had a couple very close losses. You've had a couple very close victories. And now you have 2 teams back-to-back that have been perennially pretty good in this conference, in Eastern Washington and Weber State. And yet this year it's such a wide-open conference. Where do you feel like your team is at, especially at this point where we're 6 games into a 20-game schedule?
I think we're gaining confidence. So even though we've lost a couple close ones in the end, I felt like we've still played pretty well, even against Portland State. Like, we executed. They made big time plays. The Holland Woods kid made a big time shot to beat us, and that's what good players do. And Harold Frey's done that to people too. He did the same thing to Idaho, and so it's going to be like that. I just judging by all the scores, I mean, it is there's a lot of parity in the league, and it's going to come down to kind of who makes the plays the last 3-4 minutes of the game.
Mm-hmm. Shoot, Harold Frey did make the play. He just did it 10 seconds too early against Portland State.
Yeah, exactly.
Coach, you played in the Big Sky, but the Big Sky is distinctly different than when you played. And you've got a chance to play some of the new teams like Northern Colorado, Southern Utah, but some of the older teams too, like Idaho, I know was in the league the last year. That was your first year. Eastern Washington, some of the traditional rivals. I know Eastern's on the horizon, but what's that give and take like, playing teams as a head coach that you've never seen before, really, but then also maybe the nostalgia of playing at Portland State or in Idaho?
Yeah, no, it's been fun. Like, going back to Idaho was like, it brought back a lot of memories. Playing against the kid Harry Harrison, and those guys, and going back to Eastern will probably be the same thing, and going into Dahlberg Arena will be the same. But obviously, Northern Colorado and Southern Utah, I mean, I know their coaches both really well, and I mean, they're fun to compete against, and boy, are they talented, both of those teams. And it's fun just going to different environments and different arenas, and kind of just seeing how the Big Sky's changed.
Last thing for you, Coach. I know you're on your grind here. You're right in the middle, in the heart of this basketball season. But what's it been like for you to be the head coach at Montana State now that you have been, you got 20 games under your belt or whatever it is at this point, and you're going through it in this first season?
You know what? I haven't even had a chance to even think about it.
Right.
To be honest with you, it's been. I'll tell you what, it's a lot more stressful, and just the daily decisions that you have to make that affect, so many people, every player, every person on your staff, every person in your department. And, you kind of look back now, like even when I was an assistant, sometimes you're like, you feel like you're doing a ton of stuff, but in reality, it's like, man, now I know why the head coach was acting like this. Now I know why we were doing it this way. And, because it's a totally different mind shift. From how you talk to your players, how you talk to your staff, how do you, talk to your boosters and all that stuff. And it's been kind of what I expected, but there's obviously some things you can't prepare for.
Well, Coach, we certainly appreciate you being with us, and best of luck this Saturday against Eastern Washington there in Bozeman. Going to be a great matchup, and keep it rolling here, okay?
You bet. Appreciate you guys. Always good talking with you.
You bet. Thank you, Coach. Danny Sprinkle, head coach of the Montana State Bobcats men's basketball team, again hosting Eastern Washington on Saturday. That will take a quick break. On the other side, the national championship goes to LSU. Maybe the greatest team in the history of the school, maybe the greatest team in the history of football. That's what everybody says the day after these things. But they were fun to watch. They were the best team in football this past season. There's no doubt about that. And they are getting rings. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Coulter, sometimes you need a place to stay. Sometimes you need a place to get away. Maybe you need a place to host a meeting or host a family. In any case, the Wingate by Wyndham, that's the place where you get all of those things done and more.
Some of the best corporate business rates, whether you're in town or out of town. If you need a place for a meeting for 2 or 200, they have a great setup with audio-visual elements. They can give you some snacks, and they have the best rates anywhere in Montana. Wyndham Rewards continues to be recognized as one of the best hotel loyalty programs in the United States. It makes it really easy for guests to earn free night stays, airline miles, and a bunch of other rewards. Corporate rates offer year-round discounts, even during business times for qualified regular travelers. And we guarantee that their business travelers will always feel at home, even when they're not Wingate by Wyndham.
When the mountains are calling, a Floco Mocha is just what you need to hit the road. Florence Coffee serves an exclusive, rich, all-natural chocolate blend for a mocha like no other. Top it off with real whipped cream, and you're set for whatever your day has in store. Get your Floco Mocha at any of our locations throughout western Montana and go to FlorenceCoffeeCo.com.
The best flavor under the big sky. Florence Coffee Company.
Have you been in an accident and have no idea what to do? I'm here with Catherine from the Advocates Injury Attorneys.
Unfortunately, people are injured in accidents every day, and dealing with the insurance company can add even more pain to an already bad situation. That is where hiring the advocates can help. Let us guide you through the process and take on the hassles for you so you can just focus on getting better.
If you've been injured in an accident, give the Advocates a call, 406-640-4444, or online at montanaadvocates.com. The Advocates are on your side.
This is Mike Nugent with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. Berkshire Hathaway provides Western Montana with full-time real estate professionals for you whenever you need us. Our reputation as the state's most knowledgeable and available real estate group has helped build unmatched trust in the Garden City and statewide. If you have been thinking of making a real estate move in the short or long term, give me a call. No pressure, no expectations. Just professional opinions and service at whatever pace you are comfortable with. Give me, Mike Nugent, a call today, 531-1802. And remember, every question is good to ask.
The holidays passed, sick of the snow, looking forward to the weekend and a tube of cookie dough? You got the wintertime blues now, baby. It's the wintertime blues.
Wait, the wintertime blues? Have you not been to the Desperado?
Desperado?
Yeah, nightly hockey and basketball, all the NFL playoffs, the best hot wings in Missoula, plus thick, juicy burgers and beer to go around. The Despo is an oasis of happy any time of the year.
Honey, get out of that rocking chair. The sun is shining at the Despo.
Most of my family, they never graduated high school, so I'm trying to break that barrier.
My daughter, Brooklyn, was also a motivation for me to go back to school.
Every day after work, went straight to school, and it paid off.
At age 26, Kareem finished his high school diploma.
I could not have done it alone.
I see the future is really bright for me.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Welcome to today's lottery drawing. And today's winning numbers are not yours, not yours, and another number that's not yours. And the final number is not yours.
When it comes to having money, don't rely on luck. Brew your own coffee at home instead of buying that latte. Brown bag it to work instead of ordering it. Go to feedthepig.org for more free ideas on how to save. Feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Ad Council.
If it matters to Missoula, it matters to us. Ryan Tutel and Coulter Nuanez on 102.9 ESPN Radio.
How much should I be reading into? The way you look at me in your room. And I know that nothing's really permanent. I hope that this doesn't end soon.
Welcome back. Tutel Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio. SWX Montana Television. And a national championship in the books. LSU 42, Clemson 25. Joe Burrow throws for 5 touchdowns, runs for another. And the Heisman Trophy winner stamps the award. The offensive line is the, I don't even know what's the name of that award, Coulter, for the best offensive line in college football? They got a full offensive unit award. Anyway, LSU won that thing as well. And I don't know, it was interesting because this is the first game. Look, man, Oklahoma was no match for LSU anyway, and then they had 3 of their best players suspended for the
Joe Moore Award
football game. Joe Moore Award, okay, for the offensive line. Thank you, David. And what they did to Oklahoma was shocking to me to a certain extent. The extent to which they did. I mean, 7 touchdown passes in the first half. 400 passing yards in the first half. I mean, that is crazy. And yet you still went, well, kind of the game goes the way it goes, and it snowballed on Oklahoma, and that was just it, and that was all, and whatever. Clemson is the test, and it was pretty clear there were the 3 best teams in college football this year. These 2 in Ohio State. I think people would like to have seen maybe what Ohio State would have done it, against LSU, but that's not the way the bracket's set up, and that's what it is. But LSU came into against a team that has answered the bell 29 times in a row, 2 of the last 3 national championships coming into this thing, with maybe the best quarterback in college football, and guys who've been there. We talk about this before, Coulter, in the NFL, but sometimes if you're a team that hasn't been there before, it takes something more to break through. You're going to lose something. You're going to be the Baltimore Ravens who don't get it done before you do get it done. But for LSU, it was a little bit back and forth. They were down 10 in this game early on in the first half. And then they just put the hammer down, and there was no answers from Clemson for this team. And even when Clemson got a stop and a score in the second half and made it a 28-25 game, it was a question mark heading into the end, towards the deeper into the third quarter. But in that third quarter, when that touchdown was scored, you just thought, that's it. LSU is the better team. They're up 2 scores now. They're up 11 points, and that is the end of this thing. And it was. And LSU, by the way, their defense, after that opening touchdown by Clemson, didn't allow another point by Clemson in the second half. I mean, that is an impressive performance against 2, first-round wide receivers, probably the number 1 overall pick in the draft in Trevor Lawrence, and an outstanding running back as well. I mean, this is an unbelievably good group of players that Clemson has, and they got shut out for the last 24 minutes of this football game. Tremendous work by LSU, and they proved themselves to be the hands-down best team. They won the national championship with a clean slate and had the hardest schedule in the country. I mean, they played everybody.
Beat them down.
So I couldn't be more impressed with LSU and what they did in this season as a whole.
There's certain college football programs that have these omnipresent narratives that last for forever, and sometimes they last for the duration of a coach, but sometimes they last from multiple coaches. And LSU, to me, defensively look exactly like they've always looked. And then on offense, their receivers they've always had good receivers. And they've always had great running backs. They've always just been missing the quarterback. And it's just amazing how one guy, you just turn the corner and you add Joe Burrow, and you go from the LSU that's always so solid, so good, in the mix for SEC titles, in the mix chasing the college football playoff, but not quite there. And you add this one guy, and you blow the doors off of absolutely everybody. I mean, they look so good in every element of the game. And I think so much of that comes from the athletes on defense are great, but they can play even harder, and they can play with more reckless abandon, knowing that they got a dude who's straight up good for 4 touchdown passes a game. I mean, the guy threw 60 touchdowns this year. I saw a stat on Twitter. I think it was 2015 and 2018. Do you have the stat here in front of you? Say the stat.
You got it. 2015 to 2018, LSU combined touchdown passes 59. This year, Joe Burrow, 60. One season. More than, I can't tell if this is 3 seasons worth or if there's 4. It must be 4 seasons.
Yeah,
worth. 4. So I mean, you're right. I mean, the right guy in the right spot. Well, this was the thing, man. Like LSU, I mean, they won a natty with Les Miles, right? I mean, they're a great team, and LSU has consistently been a top 10, top 8, top 5 football team with every wide receiver, at times running backs, and always the DBs that you could ever want play in the game. And their defense has always been, where they've kind of hung their hat and gotten the thing done. And why they couldn't score points, I mean, that's what got Les Miles fired, is they could not put the ball in the end zone against other teams.
What got him fired was not being
they
Bama.
were also the sort of also ran to Alabama. I mean, at the end of the day, there are a couple of programs out there who, we take it for granted, that Alabama is the king. And look, I mean, the reality is that they are. But there's a bunch of other programs who don't think that they should be, that don't think that it's just their, quote, birthright or whatever to be that. And LSU is one of those programs. LSU in their own conference, in their own half of the conference, in the SEC West, thinks that they have every resource, every ability to compete toe-to-toe and win against Alabama year in and year out. And this was the year that it finally happened. By the way, in Alabama, they won that football
Every
game.
school in the SEC believes that.
I have always been a fan of LSU. Have you? What do you think of LSU?
I love LSU.
I have always loved there's so much pageantry in college football, and there's varying traditions, and I think that college football across the country reveals the cultures of places. I mean, you can learn a lot about a place like Oxford, Mississippi by watching a pregame from Oxford, Mississippi when Ole Miss is going to play. You can learn a lot about Eugene, Oregon by watching just the kind of the makeup of the people that live there and what characterizes the town. But I've always thought that the Bayou thing that LSU's got going on, it has been awesome. And I think that the way that they've been able to recruit in their geographic vicinity, and how so many of their athletes have looked the same for so long because they're just recruiting from the same areas. These guys are ready to roll. I mean, LSU has had so many NFL caliber defensive backs, but most of them have been from their little neck of the woods. They've been from Louisiana and from the South, from Florida, from that little area. And so then to watch them break through, because they've always been just missing that piece. And it's not just the specific quarterback, but it's been able to kick down the door, truly embrace greatness. And I think that to see a guy like Ed Orgeron, so often coaches like Orgeron, they are the self-fulfilling tragedies, right? They almost get to the top of the mountain, but they could never quite get there. And so to have him actually be able to do this and lead this team, to recruit Joe Burrow, believe in him, set him loose, and then have it all culminate in beating a fine football team. I mean, Clemson is outstanding, and Dabo Swinney is outstanding. And so to have it all come to a head like it did last night is I just thought it was a great story. And I think that is why these guys resonated with people across the country all season long.
Here's something that I would like to also point out, Coulter. We talk about the state of Texas and high school football in the state of Texas and what it's like there. And you got 28.7 million people in the state of Texas. You know how many people live in Louisiana? 4.66 million. So it's a lot of people. It's 1/6 of the number of people that live in Texas. But you know what else Louisiana has? One school, LSU. Texas is Texas, A&M, Baylor, and SMU.
Don't forget OU
coming on. Oklahoma, right, is pulling from there as well, as are a bunch of other places because it's so good over there. But the high school football in the state of Texas, which gets so much run and deservedly so, the high school football in Louisiana is unbelievable. And there's only one institution that's the state institution there, whereas there's a plethora in the state of Texas that are big time, whether they're SEC, Big 12, whatever they are, SMU, top 25 type of program, that are pulling from those kids. And so I think that's why their, quote, little neck of the woods delivers all these kids, because their ability to put a fence up around their state is very, very strong, much stronger than what Texas's is in Texas. Like UT.
For sure. And I think that's what I'm trying to say as far as
Gotta go to break.
The culture being so intertwined with the school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids that just pick LSU because they want to stay in that world. Because it is a different world than a lot of other places. But I think it's a great world. I personally find the whole thing endlessly entertaining.
By
I
the
think
way,
it's awesome.
LSU, the university, taking school off yesterday and today. Here to you. You certainly should do that. Hour 1 in the books, hour 2 straight ahead. We got ourselves a good one. Mike Dugar, our buddy from The Athletic, covers the Seahawks. The season that was, the future that is for Seattle with Mike Dugar next.
Hi there. It's Les Schwab Tires. Well, more like Les Schwab alignment and brakes and shocks and wheels and tires. Now, some tire places don't offer all that. They only sell tires. And we're not sure how they sleep at night because all those services affect things like steering and stopping. That's why we offer more than tires to help keep you safe. Stop by or book an appointment at leschwab.com. Les Schwab Tires, doing the right thing since 1952.
On Russell, across from the fairgrounds.
In Western Montana, we know shopping local matters. And you may think you'd pay more for the quality and customer service that comes with it, but not at Selway Armory. Selway Armory is locally owned with knowledgeable specialists that can answer your questions. In addition to the expertise, though, Selway Armory also has a bigger selection and lower prices than the box stores. When you're in the market for firearms and accessories, save money with the experts at Selway Armory. Selway Armory, 2825 Stockyard Road, Unit E6, and online at selwayarmory.com.
No matter how far you may go, there's always one just down the road. Town Pump, who pump it up.
Need a quick bite to eat? Town Pump Big Bread Sandwiches in the deli are only $5.99. While you're there, you might as well pick up a 24-pack of Pabst or Rainier for only $18.99. Town Pump, right down the road.
Town Pump, right down the road. Pump it up, yeah.
Grizz Greats, The Coaching Tree, brought to you by Blackfoot, is a new podcast series from ESPN Missoula. Judd Heathcote, Mike Montgomery, Larry Kristoviak, and others have led the men's Grizzly basketball teams over the years. Ryan Tutel and Colter Nuanez sat down with every Grizz basketball coach, from Jim Brandenburg to current head coach Travis DeCure, to talk about what makes Montana basketball and Missoula so special. The first episode will be available Wednesday, January 15th, wherever you enjoy podcasts.
Welcome to today's lottery drawing. And today's winning numbers are not yours, not yours, and another number that's not yours. And the final number is not yours.
When it comes to having money, don't rely on luck. Brew your own coffee at home instead of buying that latte. Brown bag it to work instead of ordering it. Go to feedthepig.org for more free ideas on how to save. Feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Ad Council.
Have you been hurt or disabled? Are you missing time from work and not sure what to do? I'm attorney Chris Helmer, and Clark Fork Law Offices in Missoula is here to help. Our team specializes in worker compensation, personal injury, and Social Security disability. We fight for the benefits you deserve. Call Clark Fork Law at 728-0168 for a free consultation, or visit clarkforklaw.com. Again, 728-0168.
ESPN Radio for Western Montana, KKVU HD3 Stevensville, and 102.9 FM on K275BS Missoula. ESPN Missoula Sports Center.
Good evening, Ryan Tutel, Colter Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Sports Center. The college football season culminated in resounding fashion last night as LSU posted a 42-25 victory over reigning national champion Clemson to claim the college football playoff and FBS national titles in New Orleans.
Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow threw for 463 yards and 5 touchdowns, including 3 in the first half, as LSU raced to a 28-17 lead and never looked back against the Clemson team, gunning for its 3rd national title in 4 years. The national crown, LSU's first since 2007, 3rd in the 21st century, and 4th in school history. The title also marks the first fourth-year LSU head coach Ed Orgeron.
The University of Montana men's basketball team continued to roll Monday night, turning a tight contest at Portland State into a blowout thanks to a big defensive-minded lineup that gave the Vikings fits. head coach Travis DeCure moved forward Syed Bridget to point guard, flanked him with power forwards Mac Anderson and Derek Carter-Hollinger, and the Grizz rolled, turning a 58-56 game against Portland State into an 85-70 victory in Missoula. Grizz senior Kendall Manuel continued his hot streak, scoring 27 points. Bridget added 17 points, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds, flirting with the fourth triple-double in Grizz history on the second night in a row, and Derek Carter-Hollinger named the Big Sky Conference Player of the Week, the third Grizz to do so consecutively since conference play began.
ESPN Sports Center is presented by Clark Fork Law. Now from the Kurtz Polaris studio, here is Ryan Tutel and Coulter Nuanez.
Oh, take this veil from off my eyes. My burning sun will someday rise.
Welcome back to Tutel and Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio, SWX Montana Television. If you're looking for the show on the podcast, get it wherever you get your podcast. Just search Tutel and Nuanez, rate it, subscribe it, review it. We appreciate all of that. It's brought to us by the Wingate by Wyndham Hotel and Blackfoot Communications. We go down to the Regish Brothers RV phone line. We welcome in our good friend Mike Dugar, covers the Seattle Seahawks for The Athletic. And Mike, the Seattle Seahawks season came to a close in Lambeau Field. They could not break the streak at Lambeau. Haven't won there since the 90s, 0-9 now in the 2000s. And they got behind early, 21-3, rallied in the second half because that's what the Seahawks do, but ultimately couldn't come all the way back against the Green Bay Packers. Mike, do we have you?
Oh, yep, I'm here. Sorry about that.
Did you get my question? Because as usual, I was screaming and it was a long bloviating thing. You probably fell asleep during the course of it is probably what happened. You're like, just shut up already.
No. I got plenty of sleep since I got back from Green Bay. I didn't sleep when I was there.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Okay. But, I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, the Seahawks, they go down 21-3 at the halftime. They come, back almost all the way, but just couldn't quite get it done. Just the game sort of on the whole. What was the key to it for you and why Seattle really couldn't get it done?
Well, the key to the second half, I think, why they lost and didn't complete the comeback was just ultimately a lack of talent across the board and not enough and too many mismatches and a team that just had to play perfect and doesn't have the talent to do so, whether it's Malik Turner dropping that pass, Jacob Hollister missing the block that leads to the sack on the same drive, forcing them to punt, whether it's Ugo Amadi getting beat by Devontae Adams on 3rd and long, Delano Hill getting beat by Jimmy Graham on 3rd and long. It was just things like that in the second half at least. You look at the game in totality, which includes them getting down 21-3. I think a lot of people ignore that part because they came so close, and then we're nitpicking little plays at the end. We should start with why they were down 21-3 because that is why they lost the game. Because to ask any team to play perfect, in the playoffs when they're down that big at home. Maybe it's different if you're on the road and you're the Chiefs and you have a cheat code on offense. But the Hawks are different. They can't play perfect like that against good teams like that on the road. So I think when I look at the whole game, I'm like, wow, the Seahawks really need some talent upgrades because they did not look like a team with more talent than the opponent.
We know about the injuries to the backfield to Seattle. Chris Carson out, Rashad Penny out. We know about the injury to Will Dissly, obviously, and Ed Dixon for that matter at tight end. Where else, though? I mean, obviously, losing starting players to what amounts to season-ending injuries kills you. But where else can Seattle improve talent-wise? Where were they lacking when you compare them to a team like Green Bay?
Up front, on both sides. Mm-hmm. Mostly in the pass blocking with the line. Their pass blocking was not great. Bottom third, once again. And remember, this was in July, August, whenever that was. Dwayne Brown told us they had the potential to be the best unit, and Jermaine Ifedi agreed, which of course he was going to agree, but no, they didn't even come close. They were a decent run blocking team for sure. Definitely could open some holes for Chris Carson, but they were not a good pass blocking unit, and that you could see the difference between a good pass blocking unit and a bad one in that game. It was hard to get to Aaron Rodgers. It was really hard. You couldn't do it without blitzing. And they had a lot of games like that where unless they were sending extra guys, they couldn't get a pass rush. And then the problem was when they sent extra guys, that means everyone else was in man coverage on the back end, and they didn't have the coverage talent to make up for that. You know, and even in a game like this, you know, because they had talent to win regular season games, clearly, but they didn't have the talent at the elite level, and that shows in the playoffs. The Packers are just like, we have a couple players you can't guard. Yeah, no one knows who Allen Lazard is outside of Wisconsin, but it doesn't matter because you guys can't stop Jimmy, you can't stop Devontae Adams, and you may or may not be able to stop Aaron Jones. I actually think they did a good job on him. So, I mean, defensively, they didn't have a pass rush. They didn't have guys who could cover very well across the board, and it was just evident. I mean, you could point to some of the coaching and things like that, and Pete's mismanagement, but ultimately, I think what we really saw this year was a team that just like couldn't hold a candle to the Legion of Boom team.
You know, I thought my impression is spot on with what you said, is that this team is actually overachieved given the talent that they have or maybe don't have on this team across the board. But also, in a game like this, it seems to me, and Seattle does this all the time, they have such true fundamental belief that they're going to find a way to win the football game, particularly with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, you know, at the helm doing it and have done it before, that sometimes it feels like while they quote-unquote don't panic if they get down, they're also sort of okay being behind. And that ultimately came back to bite them. Do you sense that at all with this team?
I don't want to go as far as say they're okay with being behind. They're just not uncomfortable with it, which is a slight difference. Yep. And this is what I've taken away from the whole season, is that, you know, every time they lose, it's like, oh, this will take this as a learning lesson, yada, 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 which is fine. Losses can be lessons, and they should be. But it's only valuable if you learn the right lesson. And I think what Pete Carroll and Russell and some of the other leaders on the team take away from a game like Sunday or a game like maybe the Niners game in Week 17 is that, we fought back. We were very resilient. And I think the lesson needs to be, why were we down? Why do we keep falling down and have to rally and have to be perfect and have to rely on Russell Wilson heroics? You know, I feel like that's the lesson that should be atop the list. Like, yeah, resiliency is beautiful. It's a beautiful trait to have. Not needing to be resilient is even better. But I don't think that's the lesson that they've taken away. So I don't know what that means for the team going forward. But I feel like once that happens and you address why you were down, you're down to the Niners and have to come back, why you were down to the Ravens or the Saints or to the Cardinals, to the Rams, why you're in those holes, addressing that part, then you won't need, you know, to rally, I guess, all the time. So I don't know if that's what they've done yet. I doubt it, just on what they were saying on Sunday night and what they've said all year. But for me, when I sit there and think about the offseason, I think the team needs to take a good hard look in the mirror and figure out that part and just not just be okay with, maybe we were down, but we got Russell Wilson, so we'll figure it out. I just, you're playing with fire at that point.
Trends like that in sports, especially pro football, are so fascinating to analyze. And Ryan and I talked about this yesterday pretty extensively on the show, actually. And I was just mentioning the fact that if you look at the Pete Carroll era, which is basically the Russell Wilson era as well, as minus a couple years, these guys, they've always been at least solid. You know, they've been a 500 or better team always, but they never seem to be that team that's any more than an 11 or 12 win team. They've never been a 13 or 14 win team. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe under Pete Carroll. And I just wonder, it seems to me like they have this great formula, this great culture to always be in every game, to always be in, no matter who they're playing against. They play up to the competition, they play down to the competition. But within the scope of each season, too, though, it also seems to me like they're never going to bottom this thing out. They're never going to do a pull of Rams where they go to the Super Bowl and then revert back, or like the Bears where they're so great and then they just are not good anymore just because they go all in on this 1 year. What do you think of just this team? What do they need to do to kick down that ceiling and become that 12, 13, 14 win team? Maybe play this game in Seattle at home instead of on the road in Green Bay. Just take the next step as a franchise.
The Super Bowl team did go 13-3. They were really good.
Right. But the original boom team. Yeah, you're right.
They were home for the NFC.
Yeah. The next year, I think they went 12-4 and hosted the NFC title game. But I think it really comes down to, at least I'm going to focus on this offseason because that's what most people want to know about and don't want to dwell too much in the past. I think The offensive side of the ball needs to take a look at who they are and who they are not. Well, both sides, but I think here's what I mean by that. The offense needs to understand, look, we are a team that has one of the most dynamic players in football, and it is okay if we build an offense based around what he is good at. And I don't think that was the case in 2012, 13, 14, maybe even 15. It was like, okay, we got a young guy, we have a really good defense, and we have the best running back in the league, arguably either him or Adrian Peterson. So we can just do that. So recognize now that you're not that team anymore, and that it's okay to invest in the passing offense a bit more than the rushing offense. Doesn't mean ignore either one. Balance is key. But you can have a team that, like, okay, we can start off hot, throwing the rock around, letting Russell play some backyard football, because if we do that, we'll play up in the fourth quarter. And we don't need to give the rest of our fans high blood pressure, with these comebacks. And I think the defense needs to do the same thing. Say, who are we? More importantly, who are we not? We are not Legion of Boom. We do not have Mike Bennett. We do not have Cliff Averill. We do not have Cam, Earl, Sherm. But what do we have, and how can we adjust to that? And what does life without those guys look like? Because I still think they're trying to do a lot of the same things. Some of it's different with the blitzes, and they double team more receivers now because they don't have a lockdown, number one. But, ultimately, it's the same scheme and the same ideas, and maybe you need new ideas when you have new players who aren't as talented as the past ones. So I think once that happens, you can hit the ceiling, because once that happens, you're maximizing the talent that you ultimately have on your own roster versus maximizing the scheme that you've won with, in the past. You got to adjust to who's on your team. It's not just all scheme. I think that's what Doug Peterson at the Eagles is really good at, and I think Andy Reid is really good at that as well. Bill Belichick's obviously the best. It's just like, all right, here's what we have. What do these guys all do best? Boom, let's go. And I don't think that's been the case lately.
Mike Dugar joining us. He covers the Seattle Seahawks for The Athletic. You can find him on Twitter at Mike Dugar.
I hear you, Mike, when you're saying rather than trust that Russell Wilson will bring you back, give him the tools to just attack you and put you ahead. I totally agree with what you're saying. You mentioned some of the philosophies that they've had. I know that Schottenheimer's been under some scrutiny, and he's always been a run-first guy. So where do you think that status lies as we move forward here? Any chance for a change there, or what does Seattle need to do schematically moving forward to put Russell Wilson in those positions, assuming that they do add the proper personnel?
See, it doesn't start with a change with the OC, I think, because both the OC and the DC are just running versions of whatever Pete Carroll desires. There's a reason he didn't, when he had an open OC spot, he went with a run-first guy. Not because that's what Shoddy was really good at. That's because that's what Pete wanted. Mm-hmm. If he wanted, he could have hired like Cliff Kingsbury or one of Sean McVay's cousins. Like, he could have done what everyone else did if that's what he wanted. But that wasn't his objective. And it starts with really all I'm saying is things that ultimately will not happen. I don't think, because you look at what he believes in. Look at one of his most famous kind of ideologies. You can't win the game in the first quarter, right? Which is great. It's a great rallying cry. Sounds super good when it works. However, you can definitely lose the game by getting smoked in the first quarter and having to rally back. And even, I think, Monday in his press conference, he said something to the effect of, no, it's not how you start the game, it's how you finish it out. And it's just like, there is something to that, but it seems like he's almost ignoring the start of the game or de-emphasizing the importance of it. And that's one of those things, because Pete's like 68? You don't change when you get that old, right? Especially when you've had some success. So I think this sounds crazy, but the problem is Pete's thinking. Pete's thinking there on offense and defense is just so one way. Yeah, he'll tweak some things, make some adjustments or whatever, but the ideologies that he already has and believes in and has won with, both in the college level and at the pro level, he's going to have to come up off of some of those, use some of the evidence that the analytics boom has allowed him to have access to, and say, oh, man, maybe it doesn't really matter how we come out in the first quarter, but maybe it'd be better if we did come out great. Maybe we do have some chances to put ourselves in. Maybe you can't win the game in the first quarter, but maybe you could put yourself in a better position to win the game in the fourth quarter if you do play well in the first quarter. And he's going to just have to do like little ideological shifts like that to change this team. Otherwise, it's going to be a team that comes out flat, rallies, says they're resilient, wash, wins, repeat, and then everyone's just pissed.
Mike, I want to address going forward now for this team and what this offseason looks like and what they need to do to get better. There's two ways, as far as I can tell, to get better as an NFL team. You can get new players, through the draft or through free agency, and that's the thing that everybody seems to focus on. But also, the other way is you can coach up the guys you got so that they improve. I mean, everybody talks about, Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor. It's not like they found those guys who were that good the day they drafted them. That's why they were taken in the 5th round. They brought those guys in, found their strengths, coached them up, and put them in a position to be successful. With a guy like Bradley McDougall or Trey Flowers and some of the guys that they have in that secondary, you bring in Quandre Diggs out of free agency, who I thought played really well for this team when he was available to play. And so when you sit here and you look at this group, is there a chance that they are better just in virtue of being a young, hungry group that this team can mold? And then, of course, you're going to add draft picks, in the offseason as well.
Well, I think that the Seahawks are a little arrogant, and they're thinking that they could recreate a defense with that level of success as a Legion of Boom. I think because that's what happens when you draft, Hall of Famers in the 5th round, Pro Bowlers in the 5th round, like Sherman, Cam. Oh, okay. So we have the eye. We have the eye for talent. But I think part of it is the league has caught up to the Seahawks, and I think there was actually no better example of them being like the blueprint for other teams than the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos invested all that in the offense. They had the best offense in the world in 2013. They got their doors blown off. And they went and grabbed defensive players. I think they went and got Aqib Talib. I think they got DeMarcus Ware that offseason too. And then 2 years later, they won the Super Bowl, right? With Peyton Manning had a noodle arm, but their defense was all-time great, and it was able to fix everything else. So I think that's part of the problem. The other problem is the mental makeup of the guys in the Legion of Boom was very unique, and I think we're kind of seeing it. People now, Seahawks fans are able to take a step back and look at it, especially with someone like Sherm, who Sherm manufactured motivation and channeled it into his play, perhaps as good as any competitor we've ever seen in any sport. Right? He will, for real, fabricate some type of slight or over-exaggerate a slight.
Just like he's doing now, right?
To play great. Yeah, like that rant he went on in the last game. It's like, dude, no one thinks you're just a cover. You're just a zone corner, bro. You're in the Madden cover. People think you're really great, but he can't think that way. You don't think that way and end up being a 5th round pick that becomes a Hall of Fame player. You just don't. You know what I'm saying? You can't be wired that way and then start smelling yourself. Once you get, you have to be slighted at all times. Like the chip on your shoulder thing is real. Cam Chancellor, the same way. He needed to be a guy who was told he wasn't I think he was too big to play safety or something like that, whatever it was coming out of the draft. Also, he wanted to be a quarterback coming out of high school. He needed to be told that to fuel, who he was. And there were some other guys like that too. Michael Bennett being undrafted. There was just some other guys who were just so slighted and used that mental make. Doug Baldwin as well. They were built a certain way mentally where that you can't replicate that. Even if you have someone that's talented. Tyler Lockett might be more talented than Doug Baldwin. Probably is, actually. But he's not made up the same way. This is a guy whose dad was in the NFL, his uncle was in the NFL, and was a 2nd-round pick and broke a bunch of records at K-State, was basically out of K-State scholarship the minute he was born because of his uncle and dad being there. You know what I mean? It's just you can't just pick guys and expect them to replicate that part because the way you are mentally influences how you play more than any physical trait. So I think that's the biggest issue they've had lately, kind of rebuilding the defense. And I don't really have a good answer for fixing that. You can't just give all the prospects psyche evals. Maybe you can, actually. Maybe they should do that. But to find those special players is it's not going to be easy, But if they find one, I think if they find one all-pro guy in the next draft, they'll be fine. I really do think it's as simple as that. Because right now they have one all-pro guy on defense when they used to have 3. But if they pair Bobby and Clowney with another talent like this, I don't even care what position it's at. Then I think this team can take that next step.
Mike Dugard joining us. He covers the Seattle Seahawks for The Athletic. He's joined us all season long, doing 12 for the 12, so we certainly appreciate it. Last question for you. You talked about trying to diversify on offense, and it seems like they might have found an all-pro in the next couple of years in DK Metcalf as a wide receiver, and what he has been as a rookie has been, fantastic. And when you paired him and Lockett with that running game, they were really good offensively at times, even though they really struggled up front on the offensive line, especially because of injury at times. But where are you at with the prospects of that offense, especially with a really young and potentially all-pro type of wide receiver?
I think that we took for granted, we overlooked and kind of turned it into like a meme or a joke the way the Seahawks mismanaged Percy Harvin's talent and Jimmy Graham's talent when they were here. And like with Jimmy, the last thing I would ask Jimmy Graham to do is block, right? Like I would never just harped on the fact that he was a good blocker or a bad blocker, right? I would have maximized what he was good at and took that skill set. Like, oh man, I got Doug Baldwin, I got Jimmy Graham, man, I got Russell Wilson who can sling it. Like, oh, maybe I should build an offense around that. And I don't necessarily have the faith in them to do that. I think the offense is built around what like Chris Carson can do and what Pete believes is best in terms of running the ball. And until that changes, I just think there's just this ceiling on Tyler and DK, both as prospects. Like, I don't think DK is going to go from, like, what do you have, 900 yards, maybe 1,000 with the playoffs to, like, he keeps going up. Because I just think that the way they think offensively, philosophically, has a ceiling that won't change without, like, a huge shift in what they believe. Like, there's nothing to tell me. I mean this sincerely. There's nothing to tell me that DK Metcalf in the right system cannot have a year like Julio Jones had in 2016. I think he had like 1,600 yards, something like that. I swear to you, I do not think there's anything that prevents him from doing that. I also mean this. I do not think there's anything that would prevent Tyler Lockett in the right system from having a season like Michael Thomas just had, where he has like, what do you have, like 1,700 yards? I really think that if you threw them on the Chiefs or the Rams or the Saints, that those guys have the talent to do that. They just don't have the guys who have the offensive minds to put them there. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm like been subtly suggesting the fire everyone the last 10 minutes, but it feels like there needs to either be some huge philosophical changes or an overhaul in just like the staffing, because I think the talent is there on offense, at least, on the offense. It's just being capped by the beliefs of the people in charge.
Mike, we've always appreciated talking to you. You got great perspective. You do a great job. We appreciate that. Mike Dugar, at Mike Dugar. Read his stuff at The Athletic. You can also listen to him on the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast. And, Mike, it's been a fun season to be with you. We appreciate it. And we will catch up on down the line, maybe in this offseason a little bit, all right?
Oh, yeah. Got my number. Call me when you need me. Thank you guys for having me all season. I appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you. Mike Dugar covers the Seahawks for The Athletic. I mean, I didn't realize that they were, 4-12 and missed the playoffs the last 9 years. I mean, that's what that felt like for me. This is interesting, though. I mean, you're talking about a fan base and an organization that has won a Super Bowl, been to two, but has been perennially a good to quite good team relative to the NFL. And when you make it to the divisional rounds of the playoffs, you're a very good football team. Like, that is it. Also, if you clearly aren't as good as the other, like the Minnesota Vikings, for instance, they're just not as good as San Francisco. I mean, it ain't close.
Right.
The Seattle Seahawks, though the game was close, the dearth in the separation in total talent across the board, not one guy here or there, from the Green Bay Packers to the Seattle Seahawks was clear. It was just clear.
It was.
And that is the thing where, at what point do you really need to rethink everything that you're doing? And again, if for Pete Carroll, the oldest coach in the NFL, can he? That's a really good point. Like, he has won a Super Bowl doing this. He has won a national championship doing this. Why all of a sudden now should he not? Now, the shifting waters of what your personnel are should always be telling, but nonetheless, it's a reason that a guy named Schottenheimer is the OC. I mean, there's a lot of people who did a lot of head scratching when Darrell Bevell and Brian Schottenheimer became the offensive coordinators. But again, the point is, it's not because they couldn't find anybody else to take the job. They wanted these dudes who do these things, who believe these things about football, that you got to run the ball. And I don't know that I disagree with them, but also, if your three best offensive players are a quarterback who throws it and two guys who catch it, then you got to do that. You got to. So I don't know.
The spots where so many NFL franchises are looking for the places where Seattle's got dudes. Seattle needs to get dudes at the non-sexy positions. Think about if you just gave Seattle Brian Bulaga and David Bakhtiari. I know one of those two guys. Which one was out on Sunday? Was it Bulaga?
Bulaga didn't start because of the flu.
Yeah. Right, played a little bit. But if you just gave them those two guys and Kenny Clark, those three guys are the difference makers.
Right.
I'm just saying those guys are people that really follow the NFL and knows those guys, but they're not DK Metcalf, who everybody knows.
For sure.
They're not Russell Wilson, who everybody knows.
They got rid of Frank Clark.
They would be wrecking people, right? If they had those guys from the Packers and you move them over to the Seahawks. Yeah, I mean it would shift the power.
Totally. And so
I want to let's take a quick break though, because I want to talk more about this. I know we got some high school stuff to get to.
I want to talk too. The other thing I want to talk about is the fact is that because it's a salary cap league, so many teams go on roller coasters and they have these 2 or 3 year windows. But I honestly think that the way it raises your expectations as a franchise and for a fan base, when you're consistently good, it puts you in a very unique spot in the NFL. There's only a couple teams that are like the Seahawks. Like you said, talking to Dugar, coming off of this last year, it was almost like this was a not a great team, when in fact they were an 11-win team that made it to they won a playoff game. So I just think it's interesting, though, because there's only a few franchises that have really gotten to that point. And I think it's what makes Seattle unique, because I do think it's a huge benefit in some ways, but I also think it's sort of a detriment because you don't have then the freedom to break it all down. So we'll talk more about that on the other side as well.
The Polaris New Year's sales event is on, and it's on right now. Find your perfect ride at Kurtz Polaris. Financing as low as 3.99% APR for 36 months and savings up to $3,500. Kurtz Polaris at 2904 West Broadway in Missoula and on Highway 83 in Sealy. The mountains are full of snow, and Kurtz has the best machines, apparel, and accessories to take full advantage of the season. Online at KurtzPolaris.com. The most fun you can have in snow, Kurtz Polaris. Winter awaits.
At the Montana Club, our goal is to create a menu of mouth-watering food with variety to satisfy any craving. From the garden-fresh ingredients in our salads to our succulent, perfectly grilled Montana Club Angus steaks, we take pride in every detail that goes into preparing your food. Top off your meal with a premium cocktail, wine, or microbrew. Come as you are and satisfy your craving with our home-style breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Montana Club on Brooks and North Reserve, Missoula.
Hi there, it's Les Schwab Tires. Well, more like Les Schwab alignment and brakes and shocks and wheels and tires. Now, some tire places don't offer all that. They only sell tires. And we're not sure how they sleep at night, because all those services affect things like steering and stopping. That's why we offer more than tires to help keep you safe. Stop by or book an appointment at leschwab.com. Les Schwab Tires, doing the right thing since 1952.
On Russell, across from the fairgrounds.
Hey, it's Coulter, and I'm here with Catherine from The Advocates. If you've been in a car accident or need help dealing with the insurance companies, you should give The Advocates a call. They can tell you if you have a case right over the phone.
That's right. It doesn't cost anything to call, and we'd be happy to talk to you and assess your situation. You don't want to have to deal with contacting the insurance companies and setting up a claim. We can do that for you. We take the hassle out of the process, so you can just focus on getting better.
There you go, folks. If you've been injured in an accident, give The Advocates a call, 406-640-4444, or online at montanaadvocates.com. You deserve The Advocates.
Grizz Greats, The Coaching Tree, brought to you by Blackfoot, is a new podcast series from ESPN Missoula. Judd Heathcote, Mike Montgomery, Larry Kristoviak, and others have led the men's Grizzly basketball teams over the years. Ryan Tutel and Coulter Nuanez sat down with every Grizz basketball coach, from Jim Brandenburg to current head coach Travis DeCure, to talk about what makes Montana basketball and Missoula so special. The first episode will be available Wednesday, January 15th, wherever you enjoy podcasts.
Everybody knows that high school sports generate suspense, excitement, and drama.
They also generate higher grade point averages, stronger work habits, and greater self-esteem.
Everybody knows that high school sports give us more value for our entertainment dollar.
They also give us leaders committed to strengthening communities right here in Montana. The true value of playing sports in school can't be measured in wins and losses or dollars and cents. Studies show that participation in sports, along with other extracurricular activities, is one of the best ways to teach leadership, cooperation, accountability, and other invaluable life skills. Don't just stand on the sidelines. Encourage the young people you know to get in the game. When you do, you'll be helping them get ahead in life. High school sports, a winning part of a complete education. This message presented by the Montana High School Association and the Montana Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association.
ESPN Missoula Sports Center.
Good evening, Ryan Tutel, Colton Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Sports Center. The college football season culminated in resounding fashion last night as LSU posted a 42-25 victory over reigning national champion Clemson. They claimed the college football playoff and FBS national title in the Superdome in New Orleans.
Heisman Trophy winner Joe Burrow threw for 463 yards and 5 touchdowns, including 3 in the first half as LSU raced to a 28-17 lead and never looked back against Dabo Swinney's Clemson team, gunning for its 3rd national title in 4 years. The national title is LSU's first since 2007, the 3rd in the 21st century, and the 4th in school history. The title also marks the first for 4th-year LSU head coach Ed Orgeron. The Tigers finished the season with a perfect 15-0 record.
The University of Montana men's basketball team continued to roll Monday night, turning a tight contest against Portland State into a blowout thanks to a big defensive-minded lineup that gave the Vikings fits. head coach Travis DeCure moved forward Syed Pridgett to point guard, flanked him with power forwards Mac Anderson and Derek Carter Hollinger, and the Grizz rolled, turning an 58-56 game against PSU into an 85-70 blowout. Grizz senior Kendall Manuel continued his hot streak, scoring 27 points. Pridgett added 17 points, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds, holding with the 4th triple-double in Grizz history for a second night in a row. Derek Carter Hollinger, this week's Big Sky Conference Men's Basketball Player of the Week.
Buffalo soldier, dreaded like a rasta. It was a buffalo soldier in the heart of America, stolen from Africa, brought to America, fighting an arrival.
Welcome back to Tell Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio. We're talking Seahawks football as they head into the off-season. Happy to be with you at 102.9 ESPN on Twitter and Instagram. You can go check us out there. And don't forget, Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree podcast, the first episode out tomorrow. So go check that out wherever you get your podcast. You can get that podcast. Search it out, Grizz Greats. Jim Brandenburg, the first one. Great conversation with him. Coulter, a couple things just to finish up on the Seattle Seahawks, as they had, again, a good year. 2 things. Your point is very well made that on the one hand, to be disappointed about being 11-5 and going to the divisional round of the playoffs and that being the end is a great sign of the health of your franchise, of the expectations of your franchise and what you are. I mean, Lord knows there'd be a ticker tape parade in Cleveland if the Browns managed to pull that same feat off. So I get that, as far as what you say. The downside of that is, though, too, it's like, hey, if you have a really good season and now all of a sudden everybody's down on you, then that's the bad side of that? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Oh, I think that it's amazing, the NFL draft, how much hype there is around it, how aware we are of so many players that are coming into the NFL draft, the perceived impact and then real impact so many guys can have. And I think that with the exception of a few moribund franchises, the Cleveland Browns, the first ones that come to mind, you can actually sell losing and tanking to your fan base as long as there's a promise that it won't last forever. And, I mean, what's the stat? Hasn't every team in the NFL made the playoffs in the last 20 years? I mean,
yeah, I think so.
The Cleveland Browns are the only
because it was the Bills after the Browns made it, right?
And the Cleveland Browns are the only team this decade who didn't have an above 500 record one time, right?
Okay.
I think the last time they did was they made the playoffs this century. I think they were the only squad in the NFL that didn't have an above 500 record over the last 10 years. One season where they just went 8-8 or better. And so it shows you that it does ebb and flow. But I think that when you have a great quarterback, for example, that retires and then your team bottoms out a little bit, but then you have the promise of the future. Like, look what the Arizona Cardinals are doing right now. Like, the Arizona Cardinals won 5 or 6 games this year. But I think there's a lot of optimism in Arizona because you can see the talent that is Kyler Murray, and you can see some of the pieces that they picked up, and you can see the resurgence of Kenyon Drake and some of the other guys that they got on the squad. But I think that when you establish the level of expectation, level of excellence, like Seattle has, it's just way harder to ever go through that rebuild if and when you come to it. Seattle is lucky because they got the dude to build it around, and he's not going anywhere. But it will be a very fascinating bridge to cross because when Russell Wilson is gone, because they have never had to do it. And you just wonder, oftentimes it takes risks in the league to take that next step. And I just don't know if you're Seattle, because you've established this baseline level of expectation, if you ever can afford to dip down and have the 5-11 season in hopes of trading it for a 14-2 year.
Yeah, I mean, whether you need to do that or not, I guess is still an open question. I don't think you necessarily have to. I mean, Patriots certainly have proven that it's possible not to. The thing for me, though, and this is where I actually disagree with Mike Dugar on what he said, particularly on the defense side of the ball. I mean, he's right about you don't just find guys that have Richard Sherman's mentality to go with his great skill set. But also his great skill set was developed. It was developed hugely in the NFL and done with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the concoction, the cocktail that became the Legion of Boom, that's a perfect storm. Yes, you're not going to recreate what they had there and the way they had it. But they did have one lockdown from day one Hall of Fame player in Earl Thomas, okay? They have that. It's just he's not a safety. He's Bobby Wagner now, okay? But you can still, with the guys that you bring in, whether, again, it's Trey Flowers, Bradley McDougall, who knows where the Griffins end up, Shaq in particular, in terms of their development as players. And I think that's something that's grossly overlooked by most fans, is how much better guys can get in the league. They just assume, okay, yeah, maybe the quarterbacks, from their rookie year to their third year, you see the progress or you don't, and that's what signifies whether this guy's any good or not. But the reality is that all of these players can get far, far better when this is now their job, by the way. They're not even in school doing this anymore. And so, and what teams are able to develop that talent and also identify the strengths. I mean, you just take it as a foregone conclusion. You don't. You say this to me all the time, but like the idea that like all these guys are professional coaches and so they're all roughly equal at what they're doing is just a fallacy. There's some guys that are way better coaches in the NFL than other guys doing the same job at other teams. And Seattle has, I think, in this iteration of the John Schneider, Pete Carroll era, done an outstanding job of player development. Now, do you have the guy that's going to have the same maniacal chip on his shoulder that Richard Sherman has had? No, maybe you don't. No. But you might have a guy who has the same, drive of some sort, right. The same thing. It doesn't have to have the same container, you know what I mean? But if you can build that thing up, you can pair that skill set with a guy who could do it all like Bobby Wagner can for the next couple of years. Or, a first-round draft pick that you bring in and this guy is going to be the dude. Or a guy that you trade for like Quandre Diggs. Like, those are the things that you can do to jump off. And when Pete Carroll said this team feels like it felt at the end of Russell's rookie year, like we were right at the start of something, I buy that. I buy that. Now, they have to get better because they're okay when they're healthy, but they're old on the offensive line. That's a huge area of concern. But in the rest of this team, it's young and it has the potential to be much better even with the guys that are on it right now. They don't have to go find a bunch of dudes to bring in.
There's no doubt that they are great at player development. There's no doubt they're great at scouting and drafting. There's no doubt that they have their guy as a franchise quarterback in the face of their franchise in Russell Wilson So those three things give them a definitive advantage over almost everybody else in the league. But the thing that the NFL doesn't want the fans to hear or talk about or know is that the fact of the matter is a lot of times to take the next step, you got to take risks on guys, and you have to take guys that might be ticking time bombs. And with the culture that Seattle's created, they've by and large shipped those guys off. I mean, Frank Clark sniffed trouble, he was out, and all of a sudden he's in Kansas City. And like it, hate it, whatever.
They brought in Josh Gordon.
They did bring in Josh Gordon. That's a good point by David. It didn't last long, but a lot of times you have to take those risks, and or can they? Are they willing to? I guess the thing is, with what they've established and with the way that they're structured, it's a good thing to be the Seattle Seahawks, but you're limited in some of the gambling moves you can make, whether it's personnel, whether it's making a personnel move by cutting a veteran and really going all in on a rookie and letting them develop. They're handcuffed a little bit more than some other NFL franchises, but like I'm saying, it's a good thing because they are one of the few teams that has the NFC Championship game or bust every year as their baseline expectation.
Tutel and Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio. Take a quick break. On the other side, high school stuff. We got to get into some high school hoops that are going on right now. By the way, Hellgate, the boys, they're off to their best start since the 2014-2015 season. We'll tell you about it right after this. By the way, breaking news. Alex Cora, no longer the manager of the Boston Red Sox.
Man.
The fallout continues, man. A.J. Hinch and now Alex Cora all tied to the same thing. Cora was a bench coach for the Houston Astros in 2017 and this whole scandal. We haven't gotten into this on this show. We're not going to today, but it's worth knowing that Alex Cora, a guy who won a World Series a year ago, is no longer the manager of his team as a result of all this. I'm sure you'll hear plenty more about this in the coming days. High school sports next. In Western Montana, we know shopping local matters, and you may think you'd pay more for the quality and customer service that comes with it, but not at Selway Armory. Selway Armory is locally owned with knowledgeable specialists that can answer your questions. In addition to the expertise, though, Selway Armory also has a bigger selection and lower prices than the box stores. When you're in the market for firearms and accessories, save money with the experts at Selway Armory. Selway Armory, 2825 Stockyard Road, Unit E6, and online at selwayarmory.com.
The big skies are open. Go wild with Opportunity Reward Checking. Go ahead, jump, dance, shout. Opportunity Reward Checking will make you do that. Go wild when you get your 1% cash back on qualified debit card purchases. It all starts with an Opportunity Reward Checking account from Opportunity Bank. Visit a branch today to get started. Then go wild and spend your 1% cash back however you want. Go wild with Reward Checking from Opportunity Bank. Some restrictions may apply. Member FDIC.
Hey there, Colter Nuanez from your favorite daily sports talk show, Tutel Nuanez. I'm here with Tom from Aspen Sound. Tom, last winter I got a sweet car starter. It's something I think everybody needs.
You know, Colter, I couldn't agree more, and my wife sure thinks so too. We've got a lot of sweet deals. We actually have it capable now where you can start it from your phone from anywhere you'd like. We have two-way remotes that'll confirm to you the vehicle started all the way down to our basic package starting at just $299 installed. Come on in and check us out.
Feel the music at Aspen Sound.
No matter how far you may go, there's always one just down the road. Town Pump, pump it up.
Pizza. Stop by Town Pump today and quench that craving with a 32-ounce fountain drink for only $1.19. And did I say pizza? In the deli, grab a stuffed pizza wedge, only $3.49. If you're craving it, Town Pump has it right down the road.
Town Pump, right down the road. Pump it up. Oh, yeah.
Hey guys, it's Ryan and Colter from Tutel and Nuanez here to tell you about our brand new project that we are so excited to release, Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree, the podcast series with all of the living coaches in the history of the University of Montana men's basketball team.
From the legendary godfather of the coaching tree, Judd Heathcote, a string of some of the most successful coaches in college basketball had their careers start at the University of Montana.
It really is a remarkable group when you sit back and think about it and what all of these guys have accomplished throughout their career. careers in the game. And Coulter, I'm excited because Wednesday, our first one comes out, Jim Brandenburg.
Brandenburg was only the head coach at Montana for 2 years, but he was certainly the bridge from Judd Heathcote to Mike Montgomery, and that set the stage for the rest of this tremendous coaching tree. We'll be excited each week throughout the winter and spring to roll out Grizz Greats, the Coaching Tree podcast.
Just search Grizz Greats wherever you get your podcasts and listen all season long. Grizz Greats, a Coaching Tree podcast, is brought to you by Blackfoot Communications.
Tutel and Nuanez on 102.9 ESPN Radio for Missoula.
Welcome back to Tell Nuanez, 102.9 ESPN Radio, SWX Montana Television. Thanks for letting us be with you on a very fine Tuesday afternoon, now evening. Happy to be on board with you wherever you are, whatever you're up to. We are available on Twitter at Gus Tutel, at Skyline Sports MT, and at 102.9 ESPN. And we are also available on the podcast. Podcast available wherever you get your podcasts. Search Tutel Nuanez. Also the Grizz Greats podcast. We're all out there. That's awesome. Tutel Nuanez podcast brought to you thanks to Wingate by Wyndham Hotel and Blackfoot Communications. If you'd like to listen live, you can do so on the World Wide Web, 1029ESPN.com. It's there all the time. The stream available thanks to Opportunity Bank. Your local bank, your opportunity. Coulter, one final thought here, just briefly. The Seattle Seahawks, if LJ Collier was their number one overall pick, he barely saw the field this year. And I don't know if he's a bust or what happened or what they did with him out of TCU, but they bring in Jadeveon Clowney, Ziggy Ansah. If LJ Collier developed into the guy that they wanted him to be, and right, early returns are not good. But, I mean, you're talking about a defensive front of number one overall, number 4 or 5 overall.
5 overall, I think, for Ziggy Ansah.
And then I think, middle of the first round, 3 of your 4 defensive linemen, and LJ Collier, an interior defensive line. I mean, look, it's all about will they show up, but I mean that is significant.
It is. The thing that's crazy is that's what it takes in the NFC.
Yeah.
The 49ers. The 49ers have what, 5 first-round picks on their defensive line, and Solomon Thomas doesn't even start. He was a top 10 pick.
Right. And what do they have to endure? Like a 2-14 season, right?
Look at the Vikings. I know that Linval Joseph and Danielle Hunter are both not first-round picks, but they're all pro guys.
Yeah.
I mean, Danielle Hunter was a third-round pick who is absolutely a first-round talent. He just happened to be new to the game, but the guy's a freak. And but that's what it takes in the league, though. That's what's crazy. If you want to be playing in the Final 8, the Final 4, you got to have 4 either first-round draft pick caliber talents or all-pro, Pro Bowl level guys.
That's right. They do have that, and it'll be so interesting to see in April what direction they decide to go.
I mean, that's where the Packers have made the biggest progress, right?
Oh, easily. I mean, their pass rush was crazy. By the way, Russell Wilson, hats off to you. I mean, you can move faster when your life depends on it, but my goodness, he was absolutely a magician even in the loss. All right, hey, it's time for our Prep Extra segment. It's brought to us by the Farmers State Bank. All the bank you'll ever need under one roof. Checking, savings, investments, mortgage loans, personal loans, mobile banking options, and internet banking, all from Farmers State Bank, farmersebank.com. Coulter, boys basketball off and running. Missoula Hellgate beat Helena Capital. Missoula Hellgate right now the number 1 team in the state. Helena Capital number 3, 77-52. Very, very strong. They are now 6-0, the Knights are, on this young season. It's their best start since opening the season, 8-0 in the 2014-15 season. They got 2 college commits on the team. A lot of people know about Raleigh Wooster, of course, going to Utah State when he decommitted from Montana, going out to Utah State to play basketball. He had 20 points in the game, by the way, 8 of 13. But also Abe Johnson, who was the other outstanding junior a year ago, senior this year. Tall. I don't know how tall he is, but I mean, he's 6'8", 6'9" type of kid. He's going to Army to play basketball. 6'8", okay. So he had 21 points, actually led the scoring for the Knights in this game, and 9 of 13 shooting. I'll tell you what, for Hellgate, for as good as they've been the last several years. The heartbreak of what's happened at the state tournament, but this is, again, this is an outstanding team and the senior year for Raleigh Wooster. So, again, this is the team to beat in the state, right?
Absolutely. And you see this in Montana high school sports quite a bit too, where like a group of kids will come together and they'll be identified by their coaches early on as a group that can really do well. And this Hellgate team has 7 seniors on the squad. And Cam Lawrence is the one who's the kind of the newcomer to the group. I'm actually not sure if he played club ball with these guys or not, but he came over from Missoula Big Sky.
Yeah.
But you look at Wes Salonen and Cade McWilliams, Brandon Caldonado, who's a great two-sport star. He's an all-state football player as well for the Knights. And Raleigh Wooster and Aiden Gillum and Abe Johnson. They just have a ton of dudes who played a ton of hoops together.
Yeah.
And they've also been through it together. I mean, losing on a buzzer beater in the state championship game when you're juniors, I mean, what better motivation is there to come back as seniors and make a run and run the table in the state? And so when you're talking about 2 D1 guys, that gives you an advantage over everybody in Montana already. But then the fact that they have a whole bunch of other guys who have played with those guys, the supporting cast is outstanding. Guys that have played multiple sports together for multiple years. I mean, this is kind of the class that helped spearhead the return of football at Hellgate.
Right.
So, I mean, these guys have a lot to prove, and they've already proven so much. But what a feather in the cap. I mean, for all that they have done, multiple state tournaments in hoops, going from dozens of losses in a row to then winning games at Hellgate in football.
Yep.
What a feather in the cap it would be for these guys to go out with a state championship. And we're only 6 games in, but they're well on their way. They look like a juggernaut in the Class AA level.
Kalispell Flathead 60, Missoula Big Sky 46. Gabe Adams from Flathead at 23. Coulter Janikara, do I have this right, had 2 points for Big Sky. The question accompanying this stat: how many points did you score, Coulter, for the Big Sky Screaming Eagles back in the day? Were you filling it up? That's
a hilarious question because I don't know if this is sad, impressive, both. I know exactly how many points I scored.
It is not sad. It's not because tell the people what's the answer.
I scored 27 varsity points in my career. I played. I suited up for probably close to 45 varsity games. I started in, I think, 17 games my senior year. I was not good at basketball. There's no question. I made the basketball team. I was playing varsity early because of one reason alone. Because Brandon Bostic, who went on to play tight end at Montana State, who was a borderline NFL prospect before he blew his knee. I hope Bostic's listening. He's 6'5", 250, and they needed somebody that could guard him in practice. So they're like, okay, well, you're going to be like the 11th guy on the varsity, and you're going to sit the bench. And then my senior year, we were awful. We only won 4 games. And I remember I scored 7 points against Helena Capital in one of our only breakthrough wins.
The highlight of the Nuanez high school basketball career.
We were getting killed. We were losing by probably 30 to Sentinel my senior year, and I hit a 3 in the corner at the end because everybody's like, shoot it, and I was like, whatever, no one's guarding me, hit it, whatever. But no, I scored 14 of my 27 points at the free throw line. I was our technical free throw shooter. It's great. That's my claim to fame. I went 14 of 14 from the free throw line.
Is that real?
My senior year of high school, 14 of 14.
Wow.
That's all I got.
Kendall Manwell, take a lesson.
27 points in 20 games, so you could say I was about a 1.2 points per game score. But as former Big Sky high school coach Aaron Arledge would tell you, I set the best screen in school history. So that's pretty much all I was good for.
That's what's important.
I can't talk glory day stories, though. I was a decent athlete in football. I was an all-state player in football, and I was a good baseball player. I'm terrible at basketball. I was actually way better at basketball in college than I was in high school.
You know what? That is the truth for me as well.
Because you can't get benched at the rec center. You just go and play.
It's not hard to be better than awful, though, and that's what I found myself in later. Missoula Sentinel, by the way, 51-35 winners over Kalispell Glacier. Sentinel 3 players in double figures in that victory. On the girls' side of things, just quickly run through a couple of scores here. Helena Capital beat Missoula Hellgate. Good ball game, 51-45. Hellgate had been the number 1 team in the state, but they fall in a good game to Helena Capital. Kalispell Flathead 33, Missoula Big Sky 19. Got to get some more points on the board there.
Yeah.
And then Missoula Sentinel 61, Kalispell Glacier 53. So there's a couple of girls score for you. There you go. Our prep extra segment brought to us by the Farmers State Bank, a 4th-generation Montana bank. Local leadership for over 110 years with all the modern amenities you've come to expect. That's the Farmers State Bank. Boys and girls, fun Tuesday. It all goes downhill, man, when you got yourself a little bit of national championship to talk about, as well as some hoops. We'll get into more of it. And the release of Grizz Greats Coaching Tree podcast. Tomorrow you'll hear a little bit from Jim Brandenburg. How about that? We'll see you then. Enjoy your Tuesday evening. Good night.
More bedrooms, a big yard, better commute. Whatever your reason to buy a new home, it's the right reason. In a tough housing market, the smartest thing you can do is pre-qualify for a loan before you start looking. Farmers State Bank makes it easier than ever to start the loan process with online checklists, forms, and calculators. Your dream home is out there. Get started today at farmersebank.com. Farmers State Bank, an equal housing lender and member FDIC.
Now, the Montana Club's happy hour features BOGO beverages. Our expertly mixed cocktails, microbrews, domestics, and wine are buy one, get one free 7 days a week from 3 to 5:30. Stop in on Friday for Montini night. Sip on a top shelf martini for only $6, 5:30 to close. When you've worked hard all day and are ready to relax, the Montana Club has got you covered with BOGO happy hour 7 days a week, 3 to 5:30 on Brooks and North Reserve, Missoula.
Have you been in an accident and have no idea what to do? I'm here